Welcome back, everybody, to the 10-Minute Bitcoin Show. Gonna get you out of here before the next block. What are we doing today? Well, it was time that we got to the bottom of some rumors and superstitions, guys. There's too many people out there that they don't have an answer to one of the most important questions in Bitcoin. At least they don't have a satisfactory answer. The question that we're answering today is, why should every Bitcoin pleb run a node? I think people have lost track of what we're really talking about here when we're talking about Bitcoin, when we're talking about nodes. What do we even mean? Why should you run a node? Does it help the network? Does it enforce your rules? Does it prevent other people from spamming? What are we actually talking about? What is a node? Well, that's actually a relatively easy question to answer. Now, if you want to get into the complex nuances of all of the things that a node might do, you could, and you can lose track of the forest for the trees there. But fundamentally, what a Bitcoin node is your own personal copy of the Bitcoin ledger. Every block, from the Genesis block all the way back to when Satoshi first launched Bitcoin, chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks, all the way up until the block that's going to hit the network right as soon as you finish watching this show. Every single one of those blocks is stored inside of a database on a Bitcoin node. Now, pay attention here because this is important. Literally, a Bitcoin node is a database filled with blocks, which are then filled with Bitcoin transactions. Every transaction that's ever happened on the Bitcoin network is nice and safe and sound inside of your own personal, private, local copy of the Bitcoin ledger. Now, why is this important? Why do you care about this? You want to have this because that tells you everything there is to know about Bitcoin. That tells you how much Bitcoin there that currently exists. That tells you how much Bitcoin is in your wallet. That tells you how much Bitcoin all the other wallets own. In order to have a Bitcoin wallet that you know is telling you the truth, you have to have it look at your own local personal copy of the Bitcoin ledger. It can look at every single transaction that has ever happened in the history of the Bitcoin network, and it will make sure that it is giving you accurate information about your Bitcoin. This is crucial. This is crucial because you wouldn't want to rely on someone else for that information. You wouldn't want a third party telling you the truth about Bitcoin, whether or not that means the max supply, whether or not that means transaction history, whether or not that means the Bitcoin in your wallet is actually there and is actual Bitcoin. You need to make sure that your Bitcoin wallet can't lie to you. If you're pointing your Bitcoin wallet at someone else's backend, someone else's copy of the distributed ledger, they can make it tell you whatever they want. But if you have it pointed at your own self-hosted local copy of the Bitcoin ledger, you can know that no one's lying to you. No one's trying to cheat you, right? You can make your wallet tell the truth. Now, this is important. This is important because the software that you run determines what you allow into your copy of the ledger, right? This is where I think we've really lost the plot. All that a node does is store a database on whatever the device you're running the node on is, and put every new Bitcoin block into that database. That is the Bitcoin ledger. How does the Bitcoin network work? What is a distributed consensus? A distributed consensus is lots and lots of people running their own copy of this distributed ledger, running their own copy of the Bitcoin ledger. Everybody whose ledger is exactly the same is in a distributed consensus. We are in a distributed consensus because our ledgers are the same. We all agree on a single source of truth. Node software, particularly when we're talking about consensus rules, node software is going to tweak what we allow into our local copy of our ledger. That is literally what consensus rules are. Consensus rules say, what am I going to allow into my ledger, and what am I not going to allow into my ledger? Now, bear in mind, right? We need to remember, if our ledger disagrees with anyone else's ledger, we have to be in different networks. We can't be in the distributed consensus if the rules for what goes into my ledger are different than the rules for what's allowed to go into your ledger, because we end up with two different ledgers. And when we end up with two different ledgers, our wallets won't talk to one another. our tokens are not the same. They don't have the same history. We don't agree on a single source of truth. We don't agree on the same Bitcoin ledger. We end up in two networks. We end up with two tokens. This is crucial. This is easy, right? This is not that hard to understand. Local database on your node, your own personal private copy of the Bitcoin ledger, the software that you run, the consensus rules of that software, tell your node what blocks you're going to allow into that ledger and what blocks you're not. To be in distributed consensus, you have to have other users in your network that agree with your ledger, right? It's that simple. Now, when we start talking about changing consensus rules, guys, anybody can change consensus rules. We could fork Bitcoin right now. We could do it on stream. We're not going to do it on stream. We could do it on stream. We could fork Bitcoin right now. We could change consensus rules. We could change what our Bitcoin software allows to go into our copy of the Bitcoin ledger. But if other people on the network don't agree with those new rules, their ledger is going to be different than ours, and we're going to end up in a different network. You cannot force anyone in Bitcoin to do anything. In fact, the only thing that you can control in Bitcoin is the software that you run. And the software that you run determines what you allow into your copy of the ledger. And what you have in your ledger determines which distributed consensus you're a part of, because your ledger has to match everyone else's ledger. There's no such thing. You can't enforce anything in the Bitcoin network. You can only enforce what goes into your copy on your database, on your computer. Everyone else, if you want to make changes to the rules for what's allowed to go into that ledger, and everyone else doesn't agree, their ledger is eventually inevitably going to look different than yours. Your ledger is going to say that their ledger is in your node is going to say that their ledger is invalid if their node is following different rules than yours. So how do we even get in a distributed consensus in the first place? How do we ever all agree on the same rules for this very, very important single source of truth that we use to make sure that our Bitcoin wallets aren't lying to us? Well, the answer to that, guys, is we have a reference implementation. We have an implementation of Bitcoin software that follows a very particular change process. That change process is called rough consensus. It's different than this distributed consensus, the Nakamoto consensus of the ledgers on the network. That's a Boolean, right? Rough consensus is an open source process for implementing changes in open source software where when a proposed change no longer has any more valid, unaddressed technical concerns, it has to go in, right? This is just the process that Bitcoin Core follows. And for reasons being that rough consensus has been reliable for Bitcoin up until this point, the market has demonstrated that it prefers the distributed consensus provided by the rough consensus change process that we've achieved through Bitcoin Core. But at the end of the day, the only thing that we're talking about here, when we're talking about making consensus changes, whether that be a soft fork, whether that be a hard fork, it makes no difference. They're both changes to the consensus rules and ultimately will result in ending up with a different ledger than anybody that doesn't adopt those new rules, a different copy of your single source of truth on your node in your database. If you don't broadly get everybody to accept those changes, then you get two networks, right? That's why when we've activated soft forks in the past, when we activated SegWit, when we activated Taproot, there was a lot of time in between the release of that code and the activation and enforcement of that code on people's local Bitcoin ledgers. The reason for that was because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't contentious. We wanted to make sure that everybody had a chance to upgrade, that everybody was ready to go when the change went live so that nobody got left behind. Because we don't want to fracture the distributed consensus. As the network grows more valuable, right? That's basic network 101. A telephone that only calls one person is not very valuable, but a telephone that calls two people is exponentially more valuable because now every person on that network can call two people instead of before one person could only call one other person. Every new person that you add to the network is exponential in value growth, right? So we don't want to split the distributed consensus. We want to keep it together. but we can't force anybody else to follow particular rules on what they allow into their local copy of the distributed ledger. The only thing we've got, guys, is a reference implementation. It's the best we've got. And the reference implementation for BTC follows rough consensus. That's Bitcoin Core.